Well, the Rolling Stones are my favorite rock and roll band, and people will argue this, but Mick Jagger is probably the best frontman in rock and roll. Some folks will say Robert Plant. Some people will say Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury is my second favorite. The Beatles are extremely talented. You know, very few times in music do we have not just famous people, but absolute superstars. You know, I think it started off with Frank Sinatra, and then you had Elvis Presley, and then you had Beatles, and then you had Michael Jackson. They are in a different atmosphere of success. You know, it's hit after hit after hit, where the music just becomes a part of the fabric of our lives. You know, you hear a song and it takes you back to a certain time or a certain memory. But the Rolling Stones, having survived since 1962 and adapted with the changes in music, really says a lot. They're very, very talented. You know, they write a lot of their own music, and they didn't start like that. They started with doing cover songs, you know, inspired by Chuck Berry or Buddy Holly or Elvis Presley or, you know, blues musicians of the time. And with the Beatles, you know, if you break it down, you see, especially after they broke up and went into their solo years, you know, compare and contrast, you know, which Beatle wrote what song, or, you know, really what their style is. You know, I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You is very poppy Paul McCartney. You know, then you go into the darker I Am the Walrus and Helter Skelter, and it's more John Lennon in a deeper sense. You go into the you know, Middle Eastern Indian sound sitar, that's George Harrison. And then Ringo Starr gets a couple of guest appearances to sing lead vocals. But you know, they're both very talented. I've seen the Rolling Stones. I've not seen any members of the Beatles, you know, solo. You know, my love for music started with 50s rock and roll, and then it expanded into the Beatles actually first, when I went through my mother's old records and she had a 45 of Hey Jude, and that's what sparked my interest. But then I expanded it to Rolling Stones, the rest of the British Invasion, classic rock of the 1970s, and then beyond that, you know, what are their influences? So then I got into the blues, I got into 50s rock and roll, I got into 1920s jazz, I got into, you know, a whole new universe. But the Rolling Stones, what sets them apart is just like David Bowie. I mean, David Bowie was active from the late 1960s until he passed away, but his sound evolved with the changing of the times. Just as the Rolling Stones, you know, they survived British Invasion, they survived psychedelic rock, they survived disco. They came back in the 1980s and they continued to, you know, sell out shows and bring in huge revenue. So it's not an easy question because, you know, it goes much deeper than that. But the Rolling Stones are my favorite rock and roll band, and you know, then everybody else follows.